Welcome to Midnight Mysteries. If you feel like listening to a horror story, you're in the right place. Let me know what you think in the comments. Enjoy listening. Marco looked at the clock, 3:47 in the morning. He tossed and turned in bed, trying to fall back asleep, but it was useless. For weeks now, he had been waking up at the same time, with a strange feeling of unease. Sighing, he got up and went to the kitchen to drink a glass of water. As he sipped, his gaze was drawn to the window. Marco's house was on the edge of a dense forest, and the nighttime view of the dark, silent trees had always calmed him. But that night, something was different. Among the branches, there seemed to be movement, as if something were stealthily moving. Marco squinted his eyes, trying to focus, but he couldn't make out anything specific. Yet, he had a distinct feeling that there was a presence out there watching him. He brushed the thought aside. It was just his imagination, he told himself. The forest had been uninhabited for years. He went back to bed, trying to convince himself it was all a figment of his imagination. The next morning, Marco woke up late, with a splitting headache. He dragged himself to the office, where he spent the day in a daze. His colleagues looked at him worriedly. It wasn't like him to be so absent and distracted. Returning home that evening, he collapsed on the couch exhausted. He turned on the TV absent-mindedly and started channel surfing. At one point, he stopped on a local news report. They were talking about a series of mysterious disappearances that had occurred in the area over the past few months. The latest victim was a hiker who had gone missing in the forest near his house. A shiver ran down his spine. He nervously turned off the TV and went to bed early, hoping to finally get a full night's sleep. He woke with a start in the middle of the night. The clock read 3:47 again. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding. Something was wrong. A noise. It was coming from outside, from the forest. It was a difficult sound to describe. It seemed like a moan, or perhaps a call. Marco got up slowly and approached the window. The forest was shrouded in darkness, but he could make out movement among the trees. Something was moving out there. He was sure of it. Suddenly, he saw two glowing points shining in the dark. Two eyes. They were staring at him. Marco backed away in terror, stumbling over the rug. When he got up and looked again, the eyes were gone. In the following days, Marco grew increasingly tense and paranoid. He slept very little and spent the nights staring at the forest from the window. His colleagues began to notice his strange behavior. Marco would become irritable if anyone asked him if he was all right. One evening, while returning home, he noticed strange footprints in the mud near the driveway. They were enormous, larger than any known animal. Marco took pictures with his phone, but when he looked at them later, they were blurry and indistinguishable. That night, the call sounded again, louder than ever. Marco got out of bed as if in a trance and approached the window. The forest seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the trees moving even though there was no wind. And in the midst of that unnatural movement, Marco saw those eyes again. This time, however, they were closer, at the edge of the forest. Without realizing it, he found himself opening the front door and stepping out into the yard. The call was irresistible. as if something were pulling an invisible string tied to his mind. He took a few steps toward the forest, his bare feet sinking into the damp grass. The eyes stared at him, unmoving. Marco stopped a few meters from the edge of the trees. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was at least 3 meters tall, with a deformed body covered in dark fur. The face was a grotesque mask, a cross between a wolf and something vaguely human. The jaws opened in a grin, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Marco wanted to scream. He wanted to run, but his body wouldn't respond. He was paralyzed with terror. The creature reached out a hand with long claws toward him. The next morning, the neighbors found Marco's front door wide open. Inside, everything was in order, but there was no trace of the man. The police combed the area for days, to no avail. Marco had vanished into thin air, swallowed by the forest. Months passed, and Marco's disappearance became yet another unsolved case. His house remained empty, and the neighbors swore they heard strange noises coming from the forest at night. A year later, a young couple moved into the house. The first night, the woman woke with a start at 3:47. Looking out the window, she thought she saw a familiar figure at the edge of the forest. A man in his 40s staring at her with empty, lifeless eyes. Before she could scream, the figure disappeared among the trees. The woman shook her husband, telling him in terror what she had seen. He tried to reassure her, saying it was just a bad dream. But they both knew it wasn't, because at that moment, they clearly heard a call coming from the forest. An ancient and terrifying sound that spoke directly to their primitive minds. And they understood that soon it would be their turn to answer that call. Because the forest was hungry, and it would not stop until it had claimed the souls of all who dared to live at its edge. A month later, the house was empty again. 2 new names were added to the list of the missing, and the forest continued to grow, slowly but inexorably engulfing the world of men. Because what lives deep within the forest is ancient and patient. It knows that in the end, everyone will answer its call. It's only a matter of time.